You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 5th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme, as Kyiv mounts a fresh incursion into Russia, we examine the latest in efforts to bring about peace. We'll ask how important it is for Ukraine to retain the upper hand. Also ahead in the next 30 minutes...
We do not need to beg or borrow or copy from anywhere else. We do not seek our inspiration overseas.
With Australia's Labour Party increasing its majority in this weekend's elections, we'll ask what this means for wider global security and the relationship with Washington. We'll hear the latest on Germany's coalition as the final ministerial lineup is revealed. Plus,
we deliver consistency, immediate service. We have everything you need under one roof.
Tonight's Met Gala isn't just a high point in fashion, it's also a highlight in New York's hospitality calendar. We'll hear from the owner of one of the event's favourite hotels. All that coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. There are reports today that Ukrainian forces are launching a second incursion into Russian territory. A Russian military blog has reported that Ukrainian forces are attempting to breach the Russian border in Kursk Oblast. Well, to tell us more and to bring us up to date with the latest in any peace process, let's head to our Zurich studio in Dufourstrasse 90 to hear the latest from Emily Isahauer, who's programme coordinator for peace mediation at ETH Zurich. Very good afternoon to you, Emily. Welcome back to Monocle Radio.
Good afternoon, Emma.
This renewed effort by Ukraine to make incursions into Russia, what does this mean?
Well, this is indeed a significant development. It's the second incursion, and in fact, just last month, the Russian government had said that they had completely expelled Ukrainian troops from the Kursk region, and it's not by accident that this is happening now. Of course, later this week, President Putin will be hosting a number of foreign dignitaries in Moscow for the Victory Day celebrations, commemorating the 80th anniversary, the end of the Second World War. So this is indeed a way for Ukraine to exert pressure on the Russian government in a context where you see a number of different ceasefire proposals. On the one hand, you have the US proposed 30-day ceasefire, to which Kyiv has agreed. And at the same time, more recently, you have this 3-day pause proposed by President Putin symbolically around the Victory Day celebrations.
We'll come to the ceasefire proposal in a moment because different parties are having different views on it. But the fact that we have this incursion, this second incursion happening in the last 24 hours, in that wider context, how important is it for Ukraine to be seen to be having the upper hand?
It's absolutely important. In this conflict, we've talked for a number of months that the pressure has been more on the side of Ukraine. The urgency, a sense of urgency has been on the side of Ukraine, whereas for Moscow, they've had the upper hand in the battlefield, but also in terms of their timeline. They're willing to continue this war months, if not years. So the more pressure there can be put on Russia, including on the battlefield, the greater the negotiating position of Ukraine is. So in that sense, it is indeed very significant. There are reports of around 50 Ukrainian soldiers having crossed the border and having been able to clear minefields already. So it is quite significant, but I would say the symbolic value is even more so.
And how much does that symbolism affect any decision by Moscow to agree or not to a 30-day ceasefire? Because as you said, last week, Vladimir Putin's 3-day ceasefire lasted all of a matter of minutes. The 30-day ceasefire seems to be something more sensible, more cool-headed.
The 30-day ceasefire proposal is indeed more sensible. It's also more comprehensive, and it's directly tied to political negotiations to really resolve the outstanding issues, whereas this 3-day proposal by President Putin is really just that, a 3-day pause in the fighting, which is quite symbolic. Of course, it's in the interest of President Putin to have calm around Moscow and Russia more broadly, as he is hosting foreign dignitaries, not least the Chinese principal. But also President Putin and the Russian government, of course, always wants to come across as they're the reasonable ones here making concrete proposals that then are rejected by the other side. So their worry is, of course, that by agreeing to the 30-day ceasefire, they're really committing to a process for the way forward.
This idea of being the most reasonable party in town is being undermined by Donald Trump at the moment, because over the weekend he said that the Kremlin leader, that Putin is actually ignoring attempts by European Union leaders to communicate, and that Trump placed himself as a problem solver, saying that they've asked him for his help. But that idea that the rest of the world is knocking on Putin's door and he's not answering, that doesn't play well into the story, does it?
Absolutely not. Of course, perhaps Russia and President Putin personally feels like he needs to fight in his own weight category. So their President Trump is perhaps an obvious counterpart for him. It is interesting to see if this rhetoric coming from the White House is part of actually some pressure put on Russia. There's been previous rather strong rhetoric vis-a-vis Kiev and President Zelensky. So perhaps one can hope that the pressure will be put more on Russia now. We've seen some signs of that on social media. And an interesting development to look at and how it unfolds in the coming weeks is the mineral deal signed between the US and Ukraine. Because if you look at some of the more detailed language, it actually has rather strong language talking about Russia's aggression, talking about the importance of sovereign free Ukraine moving into the future. So it seems that there's some early signs of increased pressure on Russia. And President Trump, of course, has himself said that this is a final offer and otherwise they will pull out, even if whether pulling out fully is a viable option remains to be seen.
So does Moscow now pivot elsewhere? You mentioned a moment ago that they are hosting dignitaries. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, is on his way to Moscow this week. What difference does that make to Moscow?
Indeed, President Xi Jinping will be there, and there are reports that a number of deals will be signed. I wouldn't be too optimistic when it comes to Beijing pushing for a quick peace. Rather, I think the meetings will be about reinforcing ties between Russia and China, not least on the economic front in the broader global context of trade wars, etc. So I think even though symbolically it is happening around the Victory Day and the war in Ukraine is in the context, in the background, I think a lot of the deals and discussions will be focused on bilateral cooperation. But of course, there's a security component, and it is in the interest of Moscow and President Putin to maintain good ties with Beijing. But on the other hand, Beijing wants to maintain good ties also with Europe and other states, and they very much, even if that can be questioned, view themselves as a neutral actor in this context.
Emily Isahar, thank you so much for joining us on the line from our Zurich studio. You're listening to The Briefing live on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 8 minutes past midday. A look now at the latest news headlines. Here's Carlotta Rebello.
Thanks, Emma. Israel has approved a plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip and remain there for an unspecified length of time. The announcement comes despite international outcry at the continued blockade on the Gaza Strip. The United Nations has rejected the plan, criticizing proposed Israeli-run aid hubs. The Italian President Sergio Mattarella has called a meeting of the Supreme Council of Defense for Thursday this week to discuss national security and European defense plans. Topics will include military strategy, critical infrastructure, and the latest on Ukraine, the Middle East, and peace efforts. And US President Donald Trump says he plans to reopen and expand Alcatraz, the notorious island prison near San Francisco. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Mr. Trump said the move is aimed at tackling what he called vicious, violent and repeat criminal offenders. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. Now, the re-election of the Labour Party in this weekend's Australian elections were not only a surprise, they were also a relief for those who prized stability and feared the influence of Donald Trump in Australian politics. It encourages any current Australian government to continue on its path of rearmament. But how reliable a partner is the United States now when it comes to the nuclear AUKUS alliance and indeed the Five Eyes security arrangement? Well, joining me now is Artie Bettigeri, who's Monocle's correspondent in Canberra. A good afternoon to you, Artie. I should say good evening.
Yes, it certainly is evening. Thank you very much, Emma. It's really nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So let's talk about this. For starters, the relationship between Donald Trump and Anthony Albanese has got off to a good start. We've had a very warm conversation had between the two men. That's an adjective to describe their chat. And when asked about the election, Trump publicly said, "I don't know anything about the election, but the man who won it was very good."
So yes, as you mentioned, Anthony Albanese won a second term as Prime Minister. After Saturday's election, it was a very swift, very, very decisive victory. And in fact, the ruling Labor Party picked up enough seats to form a majority government. By contrast, the opposition Liberal Party had its worst result since possibly World War II. And that came after a campaign where its leader, Peter Dutton, apparently seemingly tried to position himself as a bit of a mini Trump, like parroting some of the policies that Trump has championed. So that's the context. Now, sometime overnight or early this morning, Trump and Albanese had a phone call, and Albanese described it to the media as warm and positive, and Trump congratulated him. Now, as you say, Trump later came out and said, yes, we had that phone call. I spoke to Albanese. He's a great guy. He's a great friend. And he also said that he didn't know who the other guy was, which kind of really compounds that failure, I think, for Peter Dutton.
So tell us now about where Australia stands. I mean, Australia is now continued to be seen as a reliable partner internationally, and AUKUS will continue. But something like Five Eyes, this brilliant security alliance arrangement, Australia as a central government pushing back against Donald Trump, Canada as a central government pushing back against Donald Trump. All eyes are turning onto whether the highest level of trust will be maintained among all these players in these organisations.
Absolutely. Look, you mentioned both AUKUS and Five Eyes. AUKUS is the security pact that brings together Australia, the US and UK. It's the most recent iteration of a very, very long-standing security relationship that Australia has had with the US. You know, we've got US military stationed here, for example. We've got a US base. You know, it works for both sides, but particularly, I think, for Australia. Like, it gives us this really strong sense of security. And Five Eyes is the intelligence sharing network that brings together five countries, as per the name, the US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. And it's really, really important to all parties involved. So I can't see that changing. You know, even if there had been a change in government in Australia, you know, AUKUS, that intelligence sharing network in Five Eyes, these bring Australia closer to its key allies. And that is just too important to us to change.
And indeed, what does the rest of the world think about this, though? Because the headlines have been brief but not long-lasting when it comes to the coverage of the Australian elections. And last week we saw the Canadian elections with Mark Carney retaining his seat, well, becoming established, dare I say it, as the Prime Minister of Canada. They were not very big, you know, notified, remarkably reported upon, despite the fact that these are sort of like these G7 countries, these are AUKUS, these are Five Eyes countries. Where does Australia now look in terms of its reliability as an international partner?
Look, I think a lot of other countries are really curious in Australia, but it's not, you know, earth-shattering. Australia's a middle power, so we don't have a huge amount of sway with the rest of the world, although we are, you know, admittedly, we are seen as a really solid voice of reason in, you know, the various multilateral groups. But this, as you say, it's about the trend, right? So, you know, everyone has been making that connection with Canada, saying it's evidence of like an anti-incumbency trend that's probably the result of Trump's election. You know, it's It's also a sign of a centre-left government winning a very, very decisive victory in a context where we're hearing increasingly about these right-wing or far right-wing political elements gaining ground in other parts of the world. So it shows that the centre is still holding, and that should give a lot of hope to centrist and centre-left elements or governments or parties globally.
Arti Betageri, Monocle's correspondent in Canberra, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Germany's centre-left Social Democratic Party has unveiled its full ministerial lineup. The SDP is a junior partner with Chancellor Friedrich Merz's Conservative bloc. Joining me now to talk about the coalition agreement is Christopher Schützer, who's the New York Times journalist based in Berlin. Good afternoon, Christopher.
Hello, Emma.
So is this now the final lineup of the coalition?
This should be, unless something happens in the next 24 hours, this should be the final lineup.
Which is, I imagine, excellent news for everybody. So what does it look like?
So you have a Social Democratic Party that's punching above its weight, certainly above its electoral results. It got something like 16% of the vote. It's getting 7 ministers in a cabinet of 18. You have some real surprises. You have a couple of people who are not actual career politicians. There's a guy who used to run a big electronics chain in Germany who's a minister. So there's some surprises, some people we don't know actually that we have to look up. And a couple sort of controversial choices. But I think everybody's ready to see this cabinet being sworn in tomorrow and to see them actually start governing.
I think we can all congratulate you on your transparency on having to look up new members of the German coalition. So just take us through a couple of the surprises. You mentioned these characters that don't come from politics. Who are they and what role will they be playing?
Well, so I guess in some ways the most surprising one is this Carsten Wildberger, who I believe is a physicist, and then he went on to run a big electronics chain. It's sort of the major one in Germany where you would buy things like TVs and PlayStations and refrigerators, and he's done a pretty good job with it. He was a lobbyist, and I mean, as somebody running this big chain, and he's now supposed to take care of the German efforts to digitize the country, which, let me tell you, is something that really needs to happen. Germany is behind on that one. And so people don't really know him other than this context of his business. And so people are sort of curious to see whether or not that'll work out. Because, of course, besides just knowing, the sort of field, you also have to know how to play the game of politics. Somebody else who is relatively, I'm just looking at the list here, who's sort of relatively unknown is a lawyer called Nina Wagen, who's going to be covering the health ministry. She has no background. She's a politician, but sort of a low-level one. She has no background in health that we know of. There's a couple of other ones that Katharina Reiche, who ran a big energy company, is going to be running the economic affairs ministry, which is a very important one, especially because Germany's economy is slumping and they need to get it going again. So definitely some interesting names there.
Because Christopher, let's just re-examine the 3 enormous tasks that the German government has ahead of it. Firstly, it is to create a sustainable and indeed a solid coalition that does not go the way of Olaf Scholz's did, which collapsed. Secondly, it has to do this while keeping the far-right AfD party at bay. But thirdly, it has the wider role of trying to re-establish itself as a major player within Europe.
Yeah, that's right. I think the first one, I'm pretty hopeful that will work out. There were some real problems with the last coalition, and the main one being that there were 3 different parties that made up this coalition. and now you only have two. The one, Friedrich Merz's party, also has a Bavarian component, so technically it's three, but it's actually two sort of party families. And I think, like with relationships, two people is much easier than three. And I think that this is actually this I think is hopeful that the coalition will stay together. The AfD is indeed a big challenge, and the way Friedrich Merz and everybody else thinks about it is that if you just govern well and you get the economy going again, you will sort of automatically get voters to come back to the mainstream parties. And the third thing about being a major player in Europe, I think the one thing one can say about Friedrich Merz is because he has sat in the European Parliament, he is, from what we can see, more of a European politician than Olaf Scholz was, who thought of things very much through the lens of sort of the country and the national lens. He was a former mayor, Scholz was. And Merz, he's making, I think, the right noises, let's put it that way. And he's definitely very interested. He's met with Macron several times already. And he's going, his first trip will be to Paris, his second trip will be to Poland, he will come to the UK, and he's going to be in Ukraine, apparently, soon as well.
Christopher Schützer, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Berlin. You're listening to The Briefing. This week sees the start of the conclave to elect a new pope. The period of mourning for Pope Francis concluding today. Well, joining me now from our Zurich studio in Dufourstrasse 90 is Juliet Lindley, journalist, former Vatican correspondent, and someone, Juliet, who's really keeping a close eye on all this for all of us, because it's a big job, isn't it?
It's a big job and it's a big deal. I'm so surprised by how many people who, until this day, had never taken a minimal interest in the Catholic Church, let alone its leadership, are coming to me saying, oh my God, on TikTok, did you see this? And oh, it is going to be a Filipino Pope, isn't it? Or the time has really come for an African Pope. I love it. I mean, I've never been so popular, Emma. Well, how else can I put it to you?
This is marvellous news for everybody concerned. And Juliet, we're incredibly grateful that you can make sense of all this for us.
Not sure about that, but it does get a little convoluted, and sometimes I kind of wish I were Wiki Lindley because there are so many facts and figures to keep track of. But do we want to start with the latest breaking news?
Of course.
And it's not to do with the conclave. It is to do with the former Pope, the late Pope, Pope Francis, and his final wish before his death, which was, quite a while ago now, 9 days ago. Is that it? Or was it 9 days ago that the funeral was? He died on 21st of April. But basically, he left a final gift for the children of Gaza. Now, this was a Pope who cared very much about the poor, about migrants, and he cared a lot about children in conflict zones. So Jorge Mario Bergoglio had a lot of Pope-mobiles. I can't tell you the exact number. Different types of Pope-mobiles. Some had bulletproof glass. Some allowed for him to sit. Some allowed for him to stand and wave to crowds as they drove through. Lately, a lot of them have been electric. But here's the thing. He had one Pope-mobile that was in the Middle East since his visit to Israel and the Palestinian territories back in 2014. And he decided he wanted to give that Pope-mobile to the children of Gaza so that it can be turned into a health clinic on wheels. So through Caritas in Jerusalem, they are turning this into a mobile health facility that will have a driver and doctors inside it and that can carry out diagnostics and it'll have emergency medical equipment for young Palestinian patients. Now, as we know, the health system in Gaza has all but collapsed. Infections are running high. There'll also be kits for quick infection tests on board. UNICEF is saying that more than 9,000 children in Gaza have not been admitted for treatment, and there's acute malnutrition. So in a way, this isn't just a converted Pope-mobile that's being given, but it's sort of a message, perhaps even to global leaders in true Pope Francis fashion, to say, let's not forget the children of Gaza. And just for a side note, Emma, Gaza has a small Christian community, very small. There are only about 1,000 Christians, but Francis made a point throughout the entire time that he was hospitalized, which was between February 4th and March, end of March, to phone the parish priest, who is an Argentinian, every day. He tried every day to phone the parish priest of the Holy Family Church in Gaza City to show his support to the people of Gaza.
It was incredible. I think it was just about the day before he died that he managed a final 30-second call to this community in Gaza. But it's a very clever final thing to do, isn't it, Juliet? Because it's a parting shot. It not only showed the enormity of Francis's heart and care for those who are vulnerable, but also it sets a very high bar, a very strong tone for any next pope and the approach that he should take to the papacy.
Well, that's it, and because we know how important sort of world peace, care for the marginated peoples, care for the poor, care for victims of conflicts, how important that was to Pope Francis. The question on everyone's minds is, will the person who succeeds him want to follow in that vein, or will there be a sort of putting reverse gear and not going backwards, but maybe putting the focus on other things? Now, here's the issue. The issue is that there are conservative traditional Catholics who say, all very fine and wonderful to put so much emphasis on refugees, on migrants, on the poor. But what about doctrine? What about maintaining the Catholic Church that has been around for so many years? How about maintaining that and not going too far in the other direction? Because yes, it's important to point out the importance of protecting those who are less privileged and to those who need our help. But this is a church and people need guidance. And this is one of the things that Pope Francis's critics often said. They said that he sowed a lot of confusion, that he failed to address real challenges within the church, and he failed to have that sense of authority, if you want, with the people who follow the Catholic Church very closely, that a lot of Catholics would have wanted. Don't forget, Emma, that a lot of the people who are saying, oh, he was great, he was so progressive, he was open to gay people, he was open to people who had been divorced, he embraced everyone, they aren't necessarily people from within the Catholic Church. There are people on the outside. Interestingly, they might even be people who are now watching what are the preparations for the conclave, let's say on social media. So you've got to sort of differentiate between the actual people that he will lead, that future pope, who are 1.4 billion Catholics, and the general public, and if you want, the secular media, who are embracing a lot of those sides of the pope that the actual traditionalists didn't embrace, let's say, as warmly.
Quickly, we've got but a few seconds to talk about the practicalities of this week. When does the conclave begin? And usually it's taken about 2 days to elect a new pope. I know that yesterday on Monocle on Sunday there was discussion about how the Vatican could spin it out to sort of increase the drama. But it's likely to happen. Is it likely to happen quickly?
Well, your guess is as good as mine, Emma. Neither you nor I will be inside the Sistine Chapel and will be amongst those 133 cardinal electors who have to all be below the age of 80. We are, of course, below the age of 80. For a start, we're not male. For a start, we're not cardinals. And there's a whole list of criteria you have to fit in order to be elected pope. But most importantly, the conclave begins Wednesday afternoon. I think there'll be 1 or 2 rounds of voting already then. And then 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoons for the following days. I think if after 3 days there is still not a decision on who the new pope will be, I think they take a break, interspersed with praying and interspersed with discussions.
And we've already seen the fire crews putting up the chimney for the smoke. Thank you so much to Juliet Linley, journalist and former Vatican correspondent, joining us on the line from Zurich. This is The Briefing. Finally, on today's programme, the Mark Hotel is a New York institution, and it's also known for its relationship with the Met Gala, for its proximity to the museum and its discreet charms. As the hotel welcomes A-listers and also reveals a new outdoor clam bar, Monocle Radio's Fernanda Augusta Pacheco caught up with the owner, Isaac Senbacher.
It's multifaceted. We can take a lot of credit for it, but, geography has a lot to do with it. We are the closest hotel to the Met in terms of geographically. So that you got to understand this. Most of the talent are dressing with very elaborate, big outfits, which doesn't do well with travel, meaning, it's tough to come here and with those kind of outfits from downtown. So basically we have that advantage. And early on, we have understood that we have that advantage, and we started catering to them. And throughout the year, we have it pat down. We know what they need. We know how the departures, people, the logistics are really, really hard, because you have 50 to 60 talent, and they're all going to the same place at the same time, and there's 60 cars waiting for them. And the elevators, you can't fit more than 2 people or 3 people, because the dresses and everything is so basically we have to give everybody a slot on the elevator. So we have people in each floor that's directing this, which with the right car pulls up, and so there's a lot of logistics that it's relied upon, that they rely upon us. So basically we deliver consistency, immediate service, whatever they need in the last minute. We have everything you need in under one roof, whatever they need. And that kind of, it's more logistics, geography, than glam. And, we have that every day. But in the Met Gala, we deliver logistics and we deliver practicality. That also leads to an after party type of thing, because what happens, most people don't eat much before, and they don't eat much during the Met Gala. So so the first after party, it's usually in our place, where we serve, mostly they like hot dogs and French fries. And
always the hot dogs.
Yeah, because they're hungry. And no, we offer a lot more, but the parties are fun. So the party scene goes everybody comes back to change and go to the first party, and they hang around till 12 or 1, and then they go to other parties. So basically we have got that down, to perfection almost. And so we deliver consistency, and that's what people need at that point.
And going back to what you said as earlier in the interview about the city of New York and the connection of someone who goes there and visit, if you go to the Mark Hotel website, there's so many information about, life with the Mark, what can you do around the city. I feel very much that it's not just for people perhaps who are staying there, but it's something that New Yorkers can enjoy as well, right? Including yourself, a resident nearby.
No, look, it's all from the get-go. When I took the challenge and I said, look, what makes a successful place, and a place which has which can last long, right? Because we're not doing something for a year or two. So I figured it has got to be a hub. Everybody comes for a reason. Let's say you come to stay because you need to be in New York. I want people to come there to the genre. Let's go back to what I say to they don't like it when I say it. I like a 3-ring circus. And they say, oh, we're not a ring, we're not a circus. And, but we are, because, we're in entertainment, and people by and large have short time, attention, the span attention. It's just people need to be entertained in a quick fashion, and not just. So basically, I always think that if you bring enough things under one roof and you are entertaining people, that's why. Okay, we have Jean-Georges, which does the room service and gives you your whatever the 3-star Michelin menu plus the perks of pizzas and burgers and whatever have you. And then, for example, we have Caviar Caspia, which is a different venue, which people come for. For brunch. The brunch is great. They come for anniversaries, birthdays, celebrations. A lot of fashion business uses it as their canteen, let's say. There are a lot of parties. So what happens is now what Michelle was telling you, I guess now we have a clam bar on Madison, which looks like an East Long Island clam bar. And so now there's an excitement around that. So basically Our job is to create excitement every day. So, if you want to come and have a lobster roll, it's right there. And, you want to have some clams, it's right there. It's outdoors. It's all red, very eye-catching.
That was Isaac Sembahar, who's owner of the Mark Hotel. You can listen to the full interview with Isaac on the latest episode of the Monocle Weekly. And that's all the time we have for today's edition of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Hassan Anderson, Laura Kramer and Desiree Bandley. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan in London, Desi Bandley in Zurich. The Briefing's back tomorrow at the same time. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening.